So I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to start with a little humor. And so let me start off by saying we are here to talk about enterprise architecture. Okay, not really funny. Okay. Now, the reason I put this up here is this is a real enterprise. This is an enterprise. And if you remember back to the movies, television shows, and things like that, you sort of remember possibly what happened at each episode. The enterprise, this enterprise is running along, minding its own business, and then there's a disturbance that occurs, a change occurs. And in the case of this enterprise, it was the Klingons. Those dastardly people attacked the enterprise, and the enterprise changed its state. Sounds familiar. Now, if you remember back to the episodes that were there, the movies, the television shows, everything, the same pattern occurred each time. You had the CEO, in this case Captain Kirk, was sitting up here in the nice cushy chairs and minding his own business, watching out for whatever he was watching out for, and all of a sudden this thing goes crazy. You know, there's smoke and there's fire and there's everything else and there's all sorts of things going on and everything is shaking and things like that. He gets thrown out of his chair, goes to the floor, picks up a communicator, looks sort of like a flip phone, you know, that was there. And the first thing he says, he doesn't call a meeting, he doesn't call a board of directors staff meeting. He says, anybody remember? Scotty, damage report. Who was Scotty? The director of IT. No, he was the guy in the back of the ship back here, sitting next to the furnace room like most IT people do. And he's the person that the CEO called when there was a problem. Now, this is stardate 5823, kind of advanced. And Scotty had two, if you remember, holographic images of the ship. One was the desired state, which was the ship going along and everything is great. The other is the as-is state with all the holes in it. And Scotty could put together a prioritized roadmap to figure out how to get the enterprise back to its desired state. We got to fix this, we got to take care of this, we got to really plug this hole, we got to get a flux capacitor to do that and all these other things. And he could put together a roadmap to get the ship back going again. Now notice what the enterprise looked like to Scotty to fix this. He didn't have 1,000 pages of text to go through. He had a series of graphical representations to figure out what he needed. This is a huge hint to all of us that these massive tombs that are created aren't going to get us anywhere. You can't see your business in 100 pages of text, 500 pages of text, or 1,000 pages of text. You and I, as human beings, can't see this. It is graphical representations. And as you'll hear throughout the week, history is on our side when it comes to this. Let's go back 7,000 years to the pyramids in Egypt. If any of you have been there, have had the privilege of going in there, you can now go into Pyramid 108, a little ways in the hallway, and on the left-hand side of the hallway, couldn't take pictures when I was over there, unfortunately, you'll see 3 graphics on the wall, the different stages of structural development of the pyramid. And then you'll see a 4th one that's all sort of like shaded out. They tried to almost erase it. And that particular, according to historians, that particular drawing was the pathway that was used to take the treasures to the pharaoh when he was buried, so that in the afterlife he would be wealthy. And that was all masked out so people couldn't see what was going on. So 7,000 years ago, they were using graphical representations when? When things get complex. Stardate 5823, they're using graphical representations when things are complex. Perhaps there's a pattern here that we should be looking at, you know, as we're moving forward. But the other thing we have to recognize is, what is that graphical representation? And that's what we're here to talk about. And in our contemporary world with Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all these other things that are out there, the patience of human beings is down to close to 0. So the other thing we had to figure out is how to present human consumable representations to people. Human consumable, which are different than what you need to compile a program. And the analogy is engineering representations are different than manufacturing representations. So human consumable representations are very different, potentially, than the ones that you need to compile a program. And those learnings are what we're going to try to essentially bring out to you as we move through this. Another piece of humor, notice what I have to say here, another piece of humor. I'm almost done with the humor, at least for the next few minutes. Everybody knows these people. Everybody knows it. Doesn't matter where I go in the world. This is you and I. And whether or not we like it or not, we all have pointy-haired bosses. They may not look exactly like this, but they go to the same school. And they say, I put a timeline together for your project, since of course I know better, that's there. I started by reasoning that anything that I don't understand is easy to do. There's only 3 things here. Phase 1, design an architecture for our worldwide operations, time 6 minutes. This is one of the issues we get into, is how long does this take? Well, one of the things I want to mention to you is, again, throughout the course, you're going to be hearing analogies that we hope that you can take back to show that enterprise architecture has a foundation. But the problem is the IT practice is immature. We've only been around for about 40 years. That is a moment in time. They've been building large structures for thousands of years. So one of the things we have to recognize is the maturity of our own profession, and it really is immature right now. That's there because it's very young. And the profession of enterprise architecture is even younger. As you'll see in a little bit, it started in 1967, and we'll get into that a little bit later, that's there. But one of the things that we need to get people to start recognizing is that in the physical world, when we have complex things, architecture takes longer than implementation, not 6 minutes. And the examples of that, one example of that you can take a look at is in Chicago. Chicago is kind of an interesting place. If you stand in one location, you can see 3 buildings that are 100 stories, plus or minus a few stories. The Hancock Tower, the Willits Tower, which used to be called the Sears Tower, and then the Trump Tower that's there. We've got 3 different buildings. And if you look at them, you can almost see the maturing of the architectural profession over time. They get a little bit more stylish and a little bit less, if I can use the phrase, rigid looking. The Hancock Tower is a trapezoid with a bunch of external cross members as you look at it. The Willits Tower gets a little bit more stylish. And then you get to the newest of the 100-story buildings, the Trump Tower, and you say, it's kind of a neat-looking building because they've been able to advance the science. They advance the science as we move forward. And we have to remember that whoopses in 100-story buildings can't occur. You can't sort of pull over to the side of the road and hit Control-Alt-Delete and say, I think we can start over again. They got to figure this stuff out. And the way you figure this out is through architecture, not through trial and error implementations. And that's one of the things that we can learn. So here's some numbers. If you take those 3 buildings and do an average, there's 3 numbers that are important when it comes to architecture. One is time. The average time to architect those buildings was 7 years. The average time to implement those buildings was 4 years. That's one set of numbers. Second set of numbers, human effort. The average number of architects to architect those buildings was 17, 17. The average number of implementation people was, Carl Sagan gave us the number, billions and billions. No, about 4,000 people, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, welding specialists, et cetera, et cetera. And the third number is cost. The average cost of architecture was 2.3% of the total building cost. 97.7% was implementation. Now, underlying all of this is a subtlety, and that subtlety is who does what. When it comes to building those buildings, the general contractor does not do architecture, ever. You have an architecture firm that does the architecture. And when the architecture is done, the general contractor comes into play, which is very different than most of what we see in organizations today. You have the general contractor waiting, so to speak, for the architecture, or some of their staff may be there. That is not done in the physical world. It's a separation of duties on purpose to make sure that there is no issue with the fox watching the chicken coop, so to speak. To a general contractor, architecture is actually an inhibitor to cash flow. Only 17 people on site versus 4,000. I hope I'm not being too harsh. I'm giving you reality as to what is going on out there right now. Architecture is a discipline and a profession that drives the implementation. It is not a step before implementation. And if you go out and actually look in the physical world, the architecture, as the building is being built, is changing. Because as you get into the physical realities, especially in one-off buildings, you don't have a history, and you say, you know what, we can't do this particular thing anymore. We have to do something a little bit different, and therefore the architectural drawings will have to change, as we move forward. The last item I want to mention to you is that when does architecture end? When does architecture end? When the enterprise dies. And this is one of the things we have to recognize. We have architectural process that we'll be talking about here, but we also have a project within the process. There's a beginning and a middle and an end. And from our standpoint, the cycles for architecture now that we recommend is 6 elapsed weeks. Not 6 elapsed months or 6 elapsed years, but 6 elapsed weeks. And we'll get into that in just a moment. So, Dilbert, physical architecture. Throughout the course, you're going to be hearing about physical stuff and how it relates essentially to enterprise architecture. Because there's a tremendous amount of history out there when it comes to physical buildings. And boy, can we learn a lot. We really can about these types of things that are there. Hi, my name is Sam Holzman with the Enterprise Architecture Center of Excellence. The sole mission of our organization is to help your organization move from the industrial age through the internet age into the information age. Since 1972, our firm has been dedicated to the practice of enterprise architecture and what we now refer to as Enterprise Architecture 3.0. Enterprise Architecture 1.0 began with Dewey Walker in 1966 when he was at IBM and came up with a process called Business Systems Planning, which was focused on understanding your enterprise through the eyes of building information systems. Enterprise Architecture 2.0 was best defined by what was referred to as the BATE model: business, application, information, and technology architectures, frankly more correctly referred to as EITA, Enterprise Information Technology Architecture, which was focused on the understanding of what needs to be done prior to implementation of information systems. We are now moving to EA 3.0, which is about information not focused directly on the internet or the technologies of delivery or the delivery mechanisms. We're moving into the information age, and EA 3.0 that we practice is about understanding the enterprise and the business through a series of human-consumable representations rather than looking at the enterprise and business through the eyes of a computer system or a compiler. Our organization is passionate about this topic, and we are professionals in this field. We're not general contractors, we are architects. As in the physical world, you hire architects to do architecture, and general contractors to do construction and implementation. Our organization is here to help you move from the industrial age through the internet age into the information age to make you the most agile organization in your field. Please give us a call or email us, and we'll be more than happy to discuss the services we have. These services range from training, certification, consulting, mentoring, through full responsibility for your enterprise architecture activities. Please give us a call. We look forward to hearing from you.